Greetings, lore seekers, and welcome back to another episode of the Lost Archives, a Star Wars Legends lore series. So, for a while now, I've been considering doing a small section on super weapons of the Star Wars galaxy. And so I thought best where to start, well, then with the jolly old Death Star. So, the Death Star in Legends is a little bit different from what the Disney canon has now established. In actual fact, there were 3 Death Stars built in the Legends continuity, and the very first of them took many years to complete, with many design flaws and failures along the way. So many, in fact, it required an entirely secret, we shall say, research institute to be created, and a smaller scale prototype to be made. All the while, the original first Death Star was being built at the same time, with having many changes made to it along the way, and even many retrofits, until eventually they got the battle station working and it became fully operational around the time of A New Hope. Whereas the second Death Star was the result of the first Death Star being built, and the designers of the first Death Star thinking, right, we could either start churning out the completed variant of the first Death Star, or we could make an even bigger one with which to use as a bigger tool to scare the crap out of our enemies. And then finally the third Death Star, which was built based off those completed plans of the first Death Star, but was destroyed before being made completely operational by the New Republic. I'm going to go through each of these battle stations and detailing how they are different from one another. So originally, the very first concept of the Death Star was conceived by Rafe Cianar, who had originally considered it to be an exploratory battle planetoid. Now, he'd basically given this as an idea to his friend Willof Tarkin, but he also noted the impracticality of the design. Willof, being Willof, well, he remembered this idea, and one day, with a meeting with Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, he brought it up and mentioned it, thinking, that might be something the Republic could look into in the future if we need to, repeal the Ruusan Reformation, or perhaps even deal with certain galactic threats or certain other things. Palpatine, liking this idea, tasked Bevel Lamelisk with actually drawing up the necessary technical information and designs for such a monumental task. Bevel pointed out at the time that there would need to be many advances in hypermatter reactions and science in order to power this device. Now, I'm not sure at this point whether or not the idea of a super laser was conceived or not, but this began eventually with a certain project the Republic began on during the Clone Wars, the secret tributary laser stream project codenamed Hamatong, which was something that the Republic would work on throughout the entirety of the Clone Wars under the secret orders of Chancellor Palpatine. Whether or not anyone in the Republic knew what this project would eventually produce, we will never know. But the initial designs were worked on by Bevel, and he contracted the Geonosians in order to help him draw up the technical specifications. Specifications they stole with the outbreak of the Clone Wars. However, this was a secret ploy by Bevel and even Palpatine himself in order to get the Geonosians to work on them without having to pay them. The Geonosians believing that they could turn this idea and weaponize it for use against the Republic in the war. Count Dooku took the plans from the Geonosians for safekeeping and brought them to his master, nobody realizing that was Palpatine. All the while, during the Clone Wars, Palpatine would have the Grand Army of the Republic seize targets and assets that could be used for various projects. A lot of these projects would eventually be used into the Death Star, including using a Margitan power crystal, which was used for the Hamatong project. And then the day came where the Republic fell and was replaced by the Galactic Empire. Where Rafe Cianar may have been the original idea for the Death Star, Willof Tarkin is the one who brought it to fruition. However, looking at the plans and its impressive amount of technology, it nearly killed the project in its infancy, considering that they didn't have the technical expertise or even a working set of plans to fully map out and build the station. As such, some of the design problems with the initial construction ended up having the Empire create a totally new top secret weapons installation. The Maw installation was essentially an answer to many of the developmental problems of the Death Star 1 while they were building it, and also subsequent gaps in the technical specifications for the station. So, to an end, several scientists were gathered by Wilf Tarkin. Many of them weren't told what they were working on, or straight up lied about it. And together they proceeded to create a smaller concept for the Death Star. The prototype Death Star was used to solve many of the problems with the much larger counterpart. It was constructed on a much smaller scale, tested, and then all the concepts they had created with it were used to fix varying technical difficulties with the much larger station. And so, after nearly 20 years of development, the first Death Star was declared complete. Its final sections were put into place, and it was tested on the very planet where it was being constructed. The planet Darksaber was destroyed in celebration of the first Death Star's construction. Now, with the technical plans complete, and the Empire seemingly wanting a second Death Star, Bevel Lemelisk and the Imperial Engineering Corps realised they had two possibilities. They could turn all manufacturing facilities to the creation of more completed SD-1, as the station had been ultimately known, or they could proceed with designing a much larger station which was more powerful and were upgraded from things that were learned in the building of the first station. Unfortunately for all of them, this Death Star would be destroyed shortly after the ordering of a second one being built, with many of the resources being gathered to start building the second station. Needless to say, the Emperor was furious and had some nasty reactions for some of the engineers that took part in the creation of the Death Star. That will be its own video because, well, the engineers survived, but not in the way you'd think. And so, after this folly, the engineers went back, fixed a lot of the design concepts, and proceeded to build the second Death Star. Now, the construction took a lot less time due to all of the teething issues with the first Death Star having long been corrected. So construction over the second Death Star took a significantly less amount of time. More resources though, because it was a much bigger station. The first Death Star had many design faults. One, it had a thermal exhaust port that could lead to the main reactor, causing a chain reaction of secondary explosions. Two, it did not have a heavy enough screening of cannons and anti-starfighter weapons in order to be able to effectively deal with snub fighters, despite its complement of TIE fighters. And the shielding on it were also known to have small holes in them that snub fighters could get through. Now, because a lot of the designers thought, well, capital ships won't be able to get through them unless they punch through them, so this isn't really a problem. So, the answer to this was obviously to change the design. Not only was the second Death Star larger, it featured a vent system that covered the entirety of the superstructure that would vent the heat out, and had sensors put in place so that if there was any unknown energy readings detected, it would shut that vent off, thus preventing any damage to the rest of the station, only that one small section. Secondly, the amount of turbo lasers on the station was increased tenfold, with the highest concentration being on Palpatine's throne world. Gotta protect the Emperor, I suppose. A sub-note as well is that the Emperor's throne room seemed to go through a complete redesign, where the original throne room seemed to have a lot more open space in it. The newer one was a bit more snugger, not really allowing for greater movement. Something that was probably influenced by the fighting style of one particular former apprentice of Darth Vader's, as well as targeting arrays being recalculated to allow for greater starfighter defense. The computer system was completely upgraded, and the energy reactors of it were as well, meaning that the station could recharge quicker and fire the main super laser much faster, with about 3 minutes between each shot, at least in a reduced power configuration used for taking out capital ships. Now, if the Empire had managed to complete the second Death Star, I do think that would have completely changed the game in the Star Wars galaxy, considering it was a station that had less problems than the original and no obvious weaknesses. So, the third and final Death Star was built not very long, was starting to be built anyway, not very long after the Battle of Endor, and it wasn't ordered by the Emperor, as because we all know he was dead. It, in my opinion, I believe it was probably ordered by state prestige, but for whatever reason, they didn't seem to have access to the completed plans for the second Death Star design. Instead, this third Death Star was following the original SD-1 design template, as the way in which this was destroyed was through the thermal exhaust port, as it was destroyed by a new Republic task force. So, for all of the Death Star's problems and eventual failures, it was conceived to be a weapon that could essentially enforce the Empire's rule throughout the galaxy, bringing troops, political prisoners, and even entire armies, and even some docked Star Destroyers to a world to blockade it. If the world proved to be defiant, or to be too much trouble, or a hard target, it could be used to wipe out that planet. Now, there are some who speculated among the Star Wars fan base that the Death Star was the Emperor's answer to the Yuuzhan Vong and their world ships. Now, there is also some who deny this. Well, to be honest, my own opinion and my own headcanon, I do believe that the Death Star was essentially Palpatine's way of enforcing his rule through fear. It also was his deterrent to use against the Yuuzhan Vong when they finally invaded the galaxy, as Palpatine had an inkling about them long before anyone else. In fact, there are little tidbits of information throughout the extended universe of the Legends lore, not the Disney canon, of them probing the galaxy far longer than anyone thought possible, as Candidace Ordo first encountered something that appeared to be a living rock during the Mandalorian Wars. Now, considering the history of the Yuuzhan Vong, that could be true, because they did end up having a civil war which delayed their invasion of the Star Wars galaxy by several decades. But that is its own lore video that I will go into in a separate time. So, some of the greatest strengths of the Death Star was not only its turbo laser, but its ability to tackle entire fleets without support. Now, truly, for it to be absolutely effective, because you know, Sith steal in absolutes, it would at least need a full fleet. Now, considering the size of the docking bays in the Death Star, it could actually house several Imperial 1 class Star Destroyers in its hangar bays, meaning it could dock and repair these ships in the middle of a battle if it needed to, meaning it could effectively carry a small fleet within it, not to mention the many hundreds of TIE fighters that were in its bay. To be honest, it's a bit of a wonder that the rebels were able to actually attack it with so little snub fighters, considering the amount of Imperial TIE fighters that were on the base. I do wonder if perhaps they were having a piloted shortage at the time, and something they'd planned to correct later. Now, going back to the first Death Star, it was designed very much as a political prisoner holder, as it had very many detention levels and various other things, including barracks, armories, and everything else that would go with a hardened military target, because you don't want your enemies being able to take over it and then potentially use it against you. But the thing that truly made it effective was that it could move through hyperspace. Now, it did this using 123 different hyperspace engines, each all powered by the hypermatter reactor. Obviously, you can't fire the super laser while this is in effect. Now, this also gave the station a gravitational and magnetic field, nearly the same size of a planet, meaning that within the gravitational pull of the Death Star, you couldn't go to hyperspace. The fact that they were still able to make it go to hyperspace despite this phenomenon is a testament to the engineers who created this. On a sub-note as well, the station did have 768 tractor beam projectors, meaning it could intercept any ship coming towards it or trying to flee from it, which would make it a perfect anti-raider and anti-pirate force as well. But to be honest, any pirate syndicate who saw this thing coming towards them and didn't immediately pack up and run was just asking for trouble. To a more civil and military personnel matter. Now, obviously, this is a space station that is going to operate in the deep reaches of the galaxy over long periods of time. That means any assignment to it is probably going to be for a very long period of time. So there won't be much chance to transfer out unless you're lucky, like the 501st. More on that later. And so this would necessitate recreational facilities for those Imperial officers and their families who'd be stationed aboard. So, to this end, there were hundreds of parks, recreational facilities, reception areas, and even taverns. Because, you know, where else are you going to unwind? The pub, a place of the community. So it would accommodate for the living quarters of all of its personnel as well. Even, like I said, leisure facilities. So a lot went into the design of this station, not just a big hawking laser in space. Now, there was a design similar to that later on, which will probably get its own video. But this has been my video on the Death Stars and their various incarnations. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Let me know if this fits into your own personal headcanon as well. And if you would like, perhaps give this video a like, maybe a comment. Subscribe if you haven't already, please. And if you have subscribed, please consider sharing it around. Well, hell, if you haven't even subscribed, consider sharing it around just to spread this around. Anyway, Lore Seekers, thank you very much for listening. Take care, and may the Lore Keepers ever be in your favour.